How do I introduce Barry Levinson? Okay, let me try it this way. Rain Man, Oscar winner, Best Picture and Best Director. Bugsy, 10 Oscar nominations, including Best Director and Best Picture. Good Morning Vietnam, The Natural, Sleepers, Wag the Dog, and Justice for All, Oscar nominee for Best Screenplay. He's credited as producer in 48 films, director in 26, writer in 27. Among his writing credits, Mel Brooks' silent movie and High Anxiety. His television work includes Homicide, Life on the Street, Oz, along with The Carol Burnett Show, The Marty Feldman Comedy Machine, The Tim Conway Show. And to finish this short list of his achievements, we have the best for last, his Baltimore films. Liberty Heights, which you just saw today, Avalon, Oscar nominee for Best Original Screenplay, Tin Men, and the legendary, industry-changing Oscar nominee for Best Screenplay, Diner. From a Vanity Fair article recently, quote, Diner invented nothing. Or to put it in quotes, Levinson invented the concept of, quote, nothing that was popularized 8 years later with the premiere of Seinfeld. In Diner, as well as in Tin Men, Levinson took the stuff that usually fills time between the car chase, the fiery kiss, the dramatic reveal, the seemingly meaningless banter, like who do you make out to, Sinatra or Mathis, tossed about by men over drinks, behind the wheel, in front of a cooling plate of French fries, and made it central. Today, we honor Mr. Levinson with the John M. Tiki Award for Artistic Vision. And to present that award, I'd like Liz Tiki, Mr. Tiki's granddaughter, to present it. And hosting and moderating the Q&A today from our best friends at Full Sail, Josh Mara, Program Director, and ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Barry Levinson.
Thank you.
Good?
Yes,
Good.
It's a terrific venue. I had no idea that it looked this way. What a great way to watch a movie.
I want to just let everybody know what an honor it is for me to be here in front of all of you, and I'm sure an honor for you as it is a thrill for me to have this time to be with such a prolific and accomplished artist as Barry Levinson. I think you guys know how this works. We do this as more of a discussion than as an interview, so your questions are welcome. I'll call on you as I see you or as they're pointed out to me. But I have the privilege of getting to go first. And I'm such a fan of your work. I feel like I grew up with your work, going back to the Carol Burnett Show. And I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't know of this film until I had a chance to see it for the first time about 10 days ago. And it's so sharp and so layered. And I'm still curious, though, why you chose to show this film to this audience at this time. Why did you choose to share it with us?
Because I'm very fond of the film, but it got caught up, as happens in this business, of the change of head of studio. So Terry Semel, who was the one that okayed it, I'd done other films at Warner Brothers. And so he okayed this, we did it, we finished it, and then there was the change of the studio. And when the new people come in, they're generally not that interested in what was, it's what they're going to do and where they can put their stamp on those films. So it kind of like got lost in terms of within the studio. So I never felt that it got the push that it should have had in its time. So there was very little publicity. And among the 4 Baltimore films, I think it's probably the one that's the most neglected.
Are there themes that you wanted to pursue at the time, 13, 14 years ago when the movie came out, that are still relevant and particularly
Well, I mean,
today?
I hope, each one of the Baltimore films, I always tried to find a reason to do it. So Diner, to me, was about male-female relationships or lack of relationships, so the inability to communicate with one another. Tin Men, to me, was like you might say, the death of the Rat Pack and the rise of the feminist movement in terms of Baltimore. Avalon was just the breakup of the extended family as time went on, and the advent of television and how it began to kind of kill off the storyteller who was the head of the family and replace it with television, which became the news storyteller. And then this one, which dealt with these issues of racism, anti-Semitism, and sort of like the elitism of it. And so I wanted to play those things, not in a way of, we've seen sometimes the darker side of anti-Semitism and racism, but this one to explore it more from the fact that we are so isolated from one another that we have no connection, so we didn't understand one another. And so I wanted to explore it more on that side than the darker side of it.
Yeah, there's a lot
because in '54, when I was a kid, it was the integration of the school system, and it was also the time when we began to, get cars and then move out of the Jewish ghetto, and we crossed Falls Road, and all of a sudden there was all these other, girls out there and all of that. And so it was this kind of learning curve in every which way, music, in terms of music and all the cultural changes taking place.
And that's much more common now as we have so much more global diversity, but that was really the first time in world history, and it was unique to America at mid-century that we were having this exploration of other.
Yeah. And it was there's also a naivete about it all. I didn't include it in the movie, but in this regard, when we used to talk about Jewish girls versus Gentile girls, we used to say, well, Gentile girls are much more punctual because when you went to a Jewish girl's house to pick her up for a date, you had to come into the house. Emily's going to be downstairs. She was upstairs. You got to meet the mother and the father. What does your father do? What is that, et cetera? He's in the appliance business. Does he know so-and-so? There's a major discussion that goes on. Right. And we said, but if we went to take out a Gentile girl, you ring the doorbell, boom, it opens up, there she was. And we said, they're much more punctual. What didn't occur to us was, it wasn't that it had anything to do with punctual. They were ready to go because they didn't want to ring the doorbell, and we went into the house, because then they would have to explain and say, Dad, Mom, this is Barry Levinson. And so that never occurred to us, that we were Jewish and we went outside of our area, and that would open the door for this whole thing about Jewish, non-Jewish, et cetera. But in our minds, it was all about punctuality.
Was there an idealization of what was behind that door of the Gentile girls? A fantasy? I sort of saw that. I felt I saw that with. When we see Debbie for the first time, she's literally dressed as a princess.
Yes. Because there was that, and we did look at them like to me, when we used to go like north of where we were, it was literally like we went to Scandinavia.
Right.
It was like, look at these girls. It was like a totally different type of girl out there, and then the wealthy, families which we knew nothing about. So that's why that scene when they go in there is that they got all this money, they can't get wall to wall. And literally we would be that idiotic to say this rug looks like it must be 100 years old, for God's sakes, because we didn't know about any of that. And I thought it was interesting to show all of that kind of, rather than I always like to look at things through the minutia, the small things to explain rather than the big specific things. A lot of movies talk about things and it seems like in more important terms. But sometimes I think if you can build a story out of all the small things, then sometimes it explains more about human behavior. And that's what's I've always gravitated to.
Small things like the sign at the pool.
Yeah, well, the sign, I mean, what's interesting about the sign, no Jews, Gentile, the Jews, dogs, or colors allowed. And we did wonder, how did they pick who went first? Who was the most objectionable,
Right.
as opposed to taking personal offense to it. But after the movie came out, I would get letters that saying, thank God that you put that in a film, because when I would say that about that sign where they lived, everybody said, well, that's impossible. That can't be. I mean, after World War II, that sign could not exist. And there it was up until, certainly into 1954.
What was the conclusion? Which was worse, to be first or to be last?
Well, we didn't know. It was a great discussion to be had. We tried to figure out any of this stuff. Oh, look at this. This fell over here.
We'll just sit forward. If we get a
now
towel, maybe we'll...
I got water here. Excuse me. I'll stay here for a minute.
How about if I stand too? Then we'll both stand and while we clean this
so
up.
So the big discussion would be was worthy of talking about those issues, which seemingly on such a kind of small level, as opposed to on a loftier level, because there's so many things that we don't understand, and the questions that we have sometimes inform us much more so, as I say, than talking about it in a so-called more pronounced way.
And yet, as we talk a lot about the exploration of other here within this movie, right? We start with one of the first images is Ben coming down the stairs for Halloween dressed as Hitler.
Yes.
And then at the very end, the big statement that he makes with his friends, they're back at the pool,
right.
They're back at the swimming hole, and they're clearly brandishing the fact that they revel in their own identity.
Right. Which is, one of the things I thought was worthwhile to explore. I mean, my cousin Eddie, did dress as Adolf Hitler. So I didn't have to make that up. And the reason, and it's said in the film, which is also, true, is it also tells you about time and how time works. Because if you take someone who's 15 years old and the war ended 10 years before, right, you're 5 years old. So it might have been 100 years ago. To someone, when you're older, 15, 10, 12 years is like a snap of the finger. But to someone who was once 5 and is now 15. So it shows you how quickly, as a new generation comes along, how easy it is not to know or to take certain things for granted that exist and not know what they were just a short time before that. So it was one of the things I was interested in and thought that it could apply to the piece.
Does anyone from the audience have questions about this film? Question coming out. There's a microphone coming to you.
Look at it, the whole chair is leaving here. Here we go. Okay.
I'm big and loud. I didn't think I needed a microphone, but I really think that Bubby's the most interesting character. And I was wondering if she came out of some sort of personal experience, or was that something that, as a team, you guys came up with? Because I've hung out with chicks like that, and there's a lot going on there.
I think we all have, right?
In terms of the grandmother?
No, in terms of Dubby.
Dubby. Oh, Dubby. Dubby, there was that type of female that I came across, and a few guys came across that was sort of like Grace Grace Kelly type. That was sort of like untouchable in a certain kind of way that you thought were sort of perfect, and then to find out that they're far less than perfect. And so it seems as if that is the image of the girl, and then of course as you begin to explore that you see all of the issues that come with it. And so I thought it would be interesting to be able to do something on that type of character, and to explore it. There was a girl named Dubby, but I can't remember her last name. So that's where the name came from. It stuck in my head somehow.
I was wondering, you, more than any other filmmaker I know, you have a wonderful sense of creating environment and the use of environment and music in terms of transitions, how you create transitions. I was wondering if you could talk about your thought process regarding how you come up with the choices of music, and how you deal with just the cars and the streets. You seem to use them in a very signature way. I was just the transitions of talking about the girls cutting to the front of the car with the hood ornament that sticks straight out. The wonderful comedic sense of. I was just wondering if you had any specific.
I don't know.
Thoughts in terms of how you come up with those.
I don't really know. I think you just sort of things come to you. It's sort of. I wish I could say to you, well, it's a very specific thought process, but it just occurs to me that that's the way it's supposed to be, and it just makes sense. So certain things you allow your instincts to just take over, and you just go with it, and that I think is what I do at times. Now, other things you sort of plan and you lay out. In two interesting things. One, as we're going to just rebuild the whole area as this goes up. Eventually, it'll be a brick wall and with windows and everything. But so it is some of it, and some of it is a process of experimentation. That you just continue to kind of play a piece of music and try another piece of music and another thing here. And a lot of the imagery is sort of in your head from the beginning. When you write it, you have a sense of the way it's supposed to look. And I'll just tell you one quick story. When I was going to do Diner, and I had this production designer, and he says, "All right, let me show you what Eddie's bedroom." And he takes me to this house, and I look at it, and I said to myself, because it's the first movie I'm going to direct, and he's been around, this guy. And I look at it and I go, gee, I don't know where I'd put the camera. Where do I put the camera? Where do the guys where do they move? I couldn't figure it out. So I don't say anything, We go to the next location, and he says, this will be great, for this and that. And I'm looking I have no idea where to put the camera. I don't know where anybody moves. I don't understand the choreography. I'm completely lost. So I'm sitting in the van as we go to the next location. I'm going, it's completely over my head. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm completely lost. And then we go to the next location, and the second I walked through the door, I went, oh, I could see people go here, and then she crosses there, and then this guy, and immediately it was that clear to me. I could just see the scene, and I said, okay, this location is great, the other two are no good. And so I went on that instinct from that point on. If I can walk into a space and I immediately know how it works, then that must be the place, and if I'm in there and I can't figure it out, something's wrong. And I just use that as a rule of thumb in terms of filmmaking. Now, I have a lot of ideas in my head when you put it on paper, but then you got to go out into the real world, and then you have to be able to make sense out of it. Or if you're going to build it, then you have to build it the way you think it ought to look.
When you've shared with other filmmakers, do others use that same process? That they see it instinctively?
Everybody works in a different way. You talk to two different directors, they'll tell you a totally different process. You find what you're comfortable with in terms of, rehearsing, which I don't particularly like to do. I rather just sort of let it find itself rather than saying, you do this. Yeah. So I wanted to have what I always referred to as sort of a controlled freedom. They can feel like they're free to almost do anything, but they can't. And it's within that, in that little kind of, parameters where you can function. But you try to create the concept of real freedom to explore.
We had a question over here. Yeah.
Mr. Levinson, thank you for hosting this particular film. I'm an advisor for Alan J. Schwab, who's financed 70 movies, Rain Man being one of them. My question to you is, how long did it take you to write this?
This script?
Yes, Liberty Heights.
Generally, the ones I do, I write in about a 3-week period. And what happens is I don't know how to, if somebody said, can you write an outline, I would probably still be working on the outline of Diner because I don't know how to do it that way. What happens is I get an idea in my head and I can sort of like see it, and then I have to go as fast as I can go to get to the end. And that's the only way. So there's a 3-week period of which all these characters, and then they start talking to one another, and I always feel like I'm not really a writer, that I'm really just taking dictation. I'm trying to keep up with, oh, that was kind of interesting. She said that to him. Oh, boy. You know, I mean, I'm literally caught and lost in it, rather than saying, well, what would he say, or what would she do, and that doesn't occur to me. It's just, it's like a 3-week period of this kind of adrenaline rush. You know.
Bringing it back to I'll get go ahead.
I wanted to thank Barry for not only directing Rain Man, but for saving it, which I'm sure a lot of people aren't aware of. And I had the privilege and honor of co-financing Rain Man with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and United Artists. And my question to you, Barry, is I'm surprised, because I know the time frame of this film and Rain Man, there was like approximately a decade difference in time between the two films. I'm curious, with the passion you, I'm sure, had for this film, why it wasn't done a lot sooner, earlier on in your career.
Why it didn't?
Why the question was why this movie wasn't done sooner in your career?
Sooner. Because I didn't think of it. You know, it's like everything else. Like an idea comes to you whenever it comes to you, and it didn't occur to me before. You know, sometimes you might have ideas, but it's like suddenly you go, oh, you know, I must have wandered around with Diner for half a dozen years, and Mel Brooks was the first person to say, well, you ought to write that as a film, but I couldn't figure it out. And then it occurred to me, and then all of a sudden, that was it.
It actually echoes a theme. You know, I couldn't help but think about watching this movie. The last line, you know, a lot of images fade, and no matter how hard I try, I can't bring them back. And how similar that is to one of the lines in the last scene in Avalon, when Sam Krasinski says, "What does he say?" If I knew things would never be, I would have tried to remember them better.
Yeah.
So same themes for two movies that are almost 10 years apart.
Yes, and he actually connects it to that. You know, he had said something about I have a relative that once said.
Right.
So it was, in my mind, I always think of these pieces as somehow being connected, even if indirectly. Mm-hmm. You know, so this crowd went to the diner. You know, they all went to the diner except in Avalon, when the kid looks out the back window and sees the diner getting put in place. So they all sort of interconnect in some fashion.
You've got characters that move. A bagel is in both Diner and in Tin Men.
As opposed to being, you know, a continuation of all the characters.
Right. Avalon is one of my very favorite movies. It's still the only movie where, when it was over, I literally stood up and applauded.
Thank you.
And there are a lot of not only the end, but there are a lot of the same themes here. A lot of discussion about assimilation and what it means in the first to lose a family and lose that storytelling, and in here in trying to find, again, comfort in the other or seeking out the other.
Yeah, in some ways.
We have a question back here.
Where should we go here? First, yeah.
I just wanted to say that in 1982, I was in charge of Little Luncheonette Counter. And I remember the night after the Academy Awards, I thought Reds was a great movie, and I thought Chariots of Fire worthy of an Oscar. But the next morning when I went to my luncheonette counter, I put on the little menu board, Diner, you're still #1 with me. And ever since that movie, I've been wanting to ask you, so it's been 30 years.
Oh, I hope I have a good answer.
Oh, you've already started to answer it, but I just need to know what in that movie is real, I mean, that you actually experienced, and what was made up, and specifically, did you really have a friend who insisted on giving a quiz about the Baltimore Colts in order to be married?
Well, yes, the Colts quiz was my cousin Eddie, who also dressed up as Adolf Hitler. Yes, she did pass, But I will tell you this. He said to me, he called me up. I was living in L.A. He was still in Baltimore. He said, you know, Barry, I saw Diner 5 times. I said, really? He says, yep. He says, now it occurs to me, you know, that it was silly to give my wife the football test. And I said, really? Thinking that he suddenly has this awareness. I said, really? Yeah. He says, yeah, because, you know, like 3 weeks after we're married, she can't remember any of the answers. So it's a waste of time.
Has anybody else been through a similar test on one, asked a wife, or a wife who's had to, or the other way, the wife who's asked the soon-to-be husband about football or any other sport? Show of hands at all? You? My dad to my mom, absolutely. In 1964, whatever it was, with the.
But the thing that was so interesting, the Baltimore Sun is going to do an article about people from Baltimore and memorable articles in the Sun paper. And I said the one that stood out for me was the review of Diner, which was this devastating attack on the film. I mean, it was horrific. And one of the things said, you know, and the absurdity of a football test, that, you know, that was just, it was too peculiar and it couldn't happen. And I always remembered at the time going, it was my cousin Eddie. It happened. What am I going to do here? It happened, you know. So.
We got a question all the way in the back here.
Oh, wait, it's all the way in the back?
All the way in the back.
All the way in the back.
Hi, Mr. Levinson. A huge, huge fan. Generational. My daughter is graduating from BU in film in a couple of months, and she's so mad she's not here. She said, slip him my resume. But we introduced her to your movies. My father introduced me to you. I was away at school when he says, you have to see Diner. And it was phenomenal, and all of your movies are great. But my real question that I wanted to throw out is, what is it like working with Mel Brooks and Carol Burnett, 2 of the funniest people I've ever seen?
Well, they are. I mean, in totally different ways. You know, Carol was, you know, they would learn the show every week, and so they didn't read cue cards. They really knew the characters, and it was a great cast. So it was a great learning experience for me as a writer, because what you wrote is what they did, and they learned it like these little mini plays. And she was just so professional and so together, and a very, very, you know, nice woman. And Mel, what was so great about Mel is that for 3 years, we'd show up every morning, we have breakfast in a deli, then we would go and we would work until lunch, and then we would, you know, have lunch, and we'd come back for another hour, and then we'd call it a day. But that went on for 3 years, through the writing, through the pre-production, through the shooting of it, through the editing of it, through the scoring of it. So for me, it was like going to, you know, Mel Brooks, you know, film college, and that I got a background in how the whole process worked. And so it was very helpful. So even though I may have seen things differently, because Mel has his own way of doing things, it was a very informative period of time where I began to develop, like, well, maybe we can do this, or maybe you can do that. So it was a great time. And he's one of maybe the funniest person I've ever met, ever. I mean, he truly is absolutely hysterically funny. I was talking to him one day, and I asked him, I said, what's it like, Mel, when you go to a screening of one of your films? And because I hadn't directed a film, so I asked the question. He said, it's like you're there, there's a preview audience, and you have like a barometer. And you sit in the back, and you're watching, and how's the audience reaction? And you're going, good, good, you're out of the business. Good, good, you're out of the business. And so that's Mel's interpretation of watching your film with a test audience.
Mr. Levinson, thank you so much for doing this. I was very fascinated watching Liberty Heights of all the different dynamics involved, whether it was the family, or whether it had to do with religion, or whether it had to do with race. I was wondering. Oh,
thank you. I was just saying, with the dynamics involving race and religion, and as well as family, what dynamic tends to resonate most with the people who talk to you about your films, whether it's Liberty Heights or whether it's the other ones with those themes?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of times people just sort of relate to the characters in the pieces. I mean, I knew someone like that. I knew a girl like that. My grandmother was like that. I mean, that's what we did. That's the way we acted, or etc. So, those 4 films. It's difficult because it's almost impossible to make those movies today, because they're really about just human behavior, and that's something that the movie business has moved away from. But it is those that, people have these personal experiences that went on in their homes. And things in terms of how their relationships to mother, to father, to grandparents, etc., that, there's always a discussion about that.
We got one in the middle right here.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. From the sublime to the ridiculous, I'm going to ask you a question that my son has asked me to ask you. There's a character and the producer sticks her head out the window and says, "I'm the concierge. My husband used to be the concierge, but he's dead." In the 3rd episode of Homicide, Life on the Streets, Andre Braugher is walking through the squad room and we hear someone say exactly the same line. So I wondered if that was a deliberate homage to Mel Brooks or somebody slipped it by you.
I don't remember it specifically.
My son will be devastated.
See, isn't that terrible?
It is.
Yeah,
so much for you,
It's
fella.
something that's in there, but I don't remember it specifically.
I had to imitate this line to get that answer.
I know.
Terrible.
You did a great job.
You did a very good job. So even if the answer doesn't work, you've just impressed the entire group here.
I'm castable. You can call later.
You've had your hand up for a long time.
I'll just stay. Hi, so I was just curious, with Baltimore being your hometown, and obviously it's close to your heart, is it harder for you to write a script? Thank you so much. Is it harder for you to write a script based on something that's closer to you, or was it just normal?
Well, I don't know if it's harder or easier or whatever. I mean, you just do what you're motivated to do. It's very strange to go back and it's very strange to go back and be filming things that, even if they weren't totally autobiographical, they were things that you knew about. So, I'll just tell you a couple of things. When we were doing Tin Man, and the production designer kept showing me these houses, and no, it's got to be a shingled house. That's where the Tin Men went. They went to the shingled houses because that's where they don't put it on brick. It's a shingled house. And it went on, they couldn't find anything. And so I said, look, go to 4211 Springdale Avenue and look at that house. That's the way the house is supposed to look. So he came back, he said, the house is perfect. I said, what do you mean the house? He said, 4211. I said, I know, that's my house. That's my house. He said, well, it's perfect. I said, oh, it's crazy. He said, no, it's great, great. So we go up to the door of this house, and the people know me because they bought the house from my parents. Right? This is now 20-some years later. Now, what I didn't know, and my parents never told me, is that they sold the house with all of the furniture in it. And I walked into the house, and it looks just like the house looked. Exactly the way it looked. And I'm walking around, everything is there, the dining room table, the so forth. And then the woman said, would you like to see your room? I said, and I used to be on the 3rd floor, and the door was black. I painted it black. It was very, like, this is not allowed in here kind of thing, as a teenager. And I go up there, and I walk in, and there's the room exactly the way it was when I left, except the pennants weren't on the wall anymore. My mother took all the football pennants off the wall. But other than that, it was exactly the same. And you get this eerie feeling of stepping back in time. And then when we go to film, and I'm sitting on the porch, and we've got all the period cars on the street, and we're getting ready, and we have all the extras out there, and I'm sitting on the porch, and I'm looking out, and all of a sudden I got goosebumps because we're shooting at the end of the summer, and I'm looking at it, and I said, this is exactly the way it looked the last time I was ever here, because I left for college, and I never came back to that house because they sold it. And it was, so I'm literally have recreated the last moment that I was ever in that house in Baltimore. And it's a very kind of strange feeling that you're stepping back in time. On the other hand, when we're shooting Avalon, and it's a funeral of Eva Krasinski, which was my grandmother, and the casting director thought it would be good to get some of the relatives just be part of the funeral. And I'm trying to explain the scene. It's a cold day in November. And I'm trying to explain, I said, in the scene here with the grandmother, et cetera, and it's like an awkward kind of moment with all the extras there. And one of the family members yelled out, we know, it's the second time we're coming to her funeral. So there is that thing between fiction and reality that kind of intertwines itself.
We have a question over here.
Let's do that one, and we'll do this one down here.
I have two questions. How long did it take you to break into the business? And then who inspired you along the way and continues to inspire you now?
Well, let me just tell you a shorthand answer to that. I went out to Los Angeles. I've been working in local television. I went out to Los Angeles, and I didn't know what to do with my life, period. I had no idea. And I was living down at the beach, Manhattan Beach. And I got friendly with this guy named George, and we would hang around together. And then at a certain point, we were sharing some kind of rundown kind of an apartment. And he came up to me one day, and he said, I got to go up into Hollywood, and my car broke down. Can you give me a ride? And I said, yeah, sure. I hadn't been up into Hollywood. I was just down at the beach. And so I drove him up there, and we pull up. And now it was becoming early evening, and we pull up. And he said, he gets out of the car. I said, well, come on in. I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to check out this acting school. I said, oh, no, I don't like acting stuff. I'll sit here in the car. And he said, no, come in. I'll feel obligated if you're out in the car. So he drags me in. And it was interesting, There was also like good-looking girls there and everything. And it was sort of fun. It was much more alive than college stuff. It was pretty interesting. So anyway, George signed up. And so George... we're riding back. He said, why don't you join? Because it was an hour drive. He said, we'll split, driving, one day and another. And we'll both be going there. It'll be cool. It'll be fun. I said, but what I'm going to do there? I don't want to be an actor. He said, it'll be fun. It'll be good. It'll be cool. You ought to do it. So I go back up the next day like an idiot, and I talk to the acting teacher. And he says to me, well, what do you mean you don't want to act? I said, well, I don't want to act. I just want to, watch. And he said, well, you can't just watch. I said, but, because I don't want to be an actor or anything. And he said, well, look, you're either going to have to be in the class, you're going to act, you're going to do the exercises, you're going to do everything you have to do, whether you want to act or not. So you either do that or you don't. So I said, oh, okay. So now for the next 2 months, back and forth, and I'm getting more interested in this, and George is getting less interested. And then George doesn't go anymore. And now it's me, an hour up, an hour back, twice a week. And after about 3 months, I said, George, you got me involved in this and you don't go anymore. I'm going to move up to Hollywood to be closer because, I kind of like it. It's fun. So I did that. And after a couple of months, I don't know where George is. I never see him again. And so, from the acting class, it led to improvisational exercises, and improvisational exercises led to me doing all of these exercises and making up stuff, which led to writing, and it gave me understanding of directing, and that's how I was able to write a screenplay, because now I've got this information, how actors function, writing, how to put things together, and so all of those steps came out of that acting class because of George. And somebody said, what happened to George? I said, I don't know, I never saw him again. I lost contact and never saw him. So I go to the movies, and I go to see Johnny Depp in this movie, Blow. This is in 2000. And I'm watching it. It opens up Manhattan Beach, 1968. I was in Manhattan Beach in 68. And so if you saw the movie, the character George Young, who became the largest cocaine dealer in North America, was the George that got me involved in the acting school.
And he got to be played by Johnny Depp, which is a big plus as well.
He got to be played by Johnny Depp. So that's what happened to George, and George was responsible for, in a sense, getting me involved in the business.
It sounds a lot like your process is very organic and intuitive. I wonder what other sensibilities and sensitivities serve you best as a writer and director.
I think just instinct in that. I think you have to do a fair amount of planning, and then you have to leave things loose enough for accidents, positive accidents, to take place, so that it might go a little further than what was, and then you can explore the possibilities from it. And so if I would use an example, we were talking about, Rain Man earlier. Dustin Hoffman came up to me one day and he said, just before we started shooting, he said, I don't know how to do this thing. It says when I get anxious, I have to do this pitching motion. And he says, it takes too long. And I said, well, let me see it. So he was showing, he said, look, I'm anxious. I got a pitching motion. It takes forever. I don't know how to do this. And I said, I know, I understand that. So I was thinking, and I said, I called him up early evening. I said, look, I got an idea. When you get anxious, when Raymond is anxious, why don't you do Who's on First? He says, what do you mean, who's on first? I said, the Abbott and Costello routine. He said, well, who does the other guy? I said, you do both. You do it, and as an autistic, you don't know that it's humorous, but it's got a rhythm to it, and you do it like a mantra. Who's on first? The first baseman. That's what I'm saying. Who's the first baseman? Yes. And you do it like a mantra. And he said, well, that's really interesting. And then I checked with a psychologist who knows all about autism and said, no, that would make sense because you just sort of do it, and you have no sense that it's even humorous. But the rhythm of it is what's intriguing. So it gets back to acting school again, is that if you've studied acting, as I did, and I was there at the end like 7 days a week, you understand the issues that come up, the problems that an actor may face, and then as a writer, how do you fix it so that you find something, and out of it, it takes it to another level. And so in Rain Man, Who's on First keeps appearing throughout the piece. Sometimes we'd say, well, why don't we do it here? It would be good. After the auto accident on the highway, he won't get back into the car, and he keeps doing Who's on First, et cetera. And so you find what the problems are at times, how to fix the problem, and maybe at the same time advance the piece maybe and improve a moment here or there.
With rhythms, so much of the Baltimore films are about those scenes where it looks like you've given the actors room to improvise. Is it more about the rhythm of what they're saying than what they're at? We see it over roast beef, and we see it over Bonanza and the like.
Yeah, because to me it's not exactly the line. You don't have to say it just exactly the way. It is, how does it work that to your ear it sounds right? So because we have a tendency to talk over one another and to be slightly inarticulate at the same time, that we don't always finish the sentence, and so all of those little imperfections I think sometimes are worthy to bring to the table.
And when you see it, now 30 years since that movie came out, it was really the first movie where that was allowed, sort of that freedom was allowed to happen. You see it in Seinfeld and in other movies and in other shows. Do you feel pride of ownership in that?
No, I mean, it's just what you do. That's all it is. And look, the business is made up of, there's these, the ups and downs of the business, and are part of it. And Diner, in a sense, to me was, I got it all in one movie, because the movie was, first review, the Variety said, it's a dark and depressing drama. So they didn't even know it was funny. And then there was another review that was terrible. And then the movie was pulled out of release. See, most people don't know that it was pulled out of release. So that was like, me as now trying to be a director, and a total failure, because the movie's pulled from release. And then all of a sudden it gets resurrected, it comes back, and all of a sudden, got great reviews, and it breaks box office records, and all of a sudden you're like, celebrate it. So in one movie, you got both ends of it, You're a hack, you're out of the business, and you're celebrated. And that's the way it works. That's part of it, and you have to have a thick skin to survive it, because you're continually under attack periodically, because that's the nature of the business. So
it's a fascinating story.
I have a question all the way in the back.
All the way in the back, yeah.
Yes, I haven't heard much about The Natural, which is probably one of my favorite movies that you did. And I probably have seen it about 20 times. I even have a jacket from the movie.
Really?
So, yeah, there you go.
But that's worth something now.
Oh, no, my wife even said, I should get you to sign it, but then I could never wear it anymore. So, but The question I have, where do you rate that on your other movies as a good, well, of course it's a good feel movie because of Robert Redford and everything that he does, but was it really very interesting to work with Redford and Duvall and Brimley and all those guys on top and Close? And
Well, it was, because I went from Diner, which is a small little intimate movie with non-movie stars, to a big film with big names. And I have to give it to Redford because Redford saw Diner, and we met, and he said, we should. I'd love to do a movie with you sometime. And you figure, oh, that's Robert Redford, and so he said, if you have an idea, maybe we should get together and talk about it. So a couple months later, I had an idea for a movie, and we talked about it, and he said, no, I don't know, it doesn't strike me. And then we just started sitting around talking about baseball. And out of the baseball thing, he said, I got this script, based on the Malamud, the Natural, and why don't you have a look at it? So, he gave it to me, and I said goodbye, and I read it, and I said, this thing has got great potential, and it happened. One of those weird things, we just started talking about baseball, and it led to it. It wasn't on his mind, he had it. So it was a totally different experience because it was a much more classical designed piece, and then I wanted to push it to make it sort of like that it's not real. It's almost like every baseball story retold, that it becomes bigger than life. It's like when people talk about a baseball game, and they're retelling it, it gets to be bigger and bigger. It's not like he ran to the wall and caught it. It's like he was running to the wall. He had to leap up. He was, everything gets to be heightened, and that was kind of the fun of The Natural.
We got one over here.
First of all, I'd like to say I'm from Baltimore, and so are many people who have come here today. So everybody stand up from Baltimore and clap. Just to show you the support of Baltimore.
That's very nice.
I think it's great. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, your screenwriting is very organic to the actor. And I was wondering if you had challenges along the way, especially early on, from the hierarchy of Hollywood in order to really get them on the same page with you.
Well, it's a good question. Basically, when I wrote Diner and I gave it to my agent, and who called me and he said, I don't understand, what is this? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, there's like nothing here. And I said, really? And then I explained it to him, and he said, well, let me go read it again. And then he said, now I know what it is. Now, Ellen Barkin has said the same thing, and talking to her about it, she said, when I got the script, I read it, and I threw it in the trash can. And she was dating someone who saw it and pulled it out of the trash can and read it and said, what about this piece? And she says, no, she said, it's terrible. And he said, no, you got to read this thing again. So there is a way to read it where you go, well, there's nothing here, because it's just talking. And unless, because it does not overtly tell you the story. It doesn't really tell you where the dilemmas are. It's just in this way, and if you read it on a certain level, you go, I don't know, there's nothing here. And there was also critics initially who said there's nothing here, because it broke certain boundaries, certain conventions at that time, because it's about friendship, but nobody talks about friendship, I wanted it to be, as an example, wandering around, when I showed a rough cut to the studio, and the studio person, and we were having lunch, he said, you got a lot to learn about editing. I said, well, I'm sure I do. He said, like an example, the character's asking about the roast beef, and he says, da, da, da. He said, let him ask the roast beef, and then cut, and get to the story. And I said, but that is the story. That's it. That tells you about their relationship, because they can argue about this sandwich that will tell you everything you need to know about their relationships with one another, as opposed to talking about the relationship. And so the movie does that periodically, where it comes up throughout. Are you going that way? Are you going home? Do you want to ride? If you're going that way, I'll go. Just say the way you want to ride. If you're not going that way, I'll stay here. It's that way of doing it. So that to me is is dialogue. And it goes back to, and here's the interesting thing, as a kid, Marty was on television, the original Marty. And I saw it, and I didn't remember hardly anything about it, and the relationship between Marty and the girl or whatever. It did not stand out to me. But what did stand out to me was one line, which is, "What do you want to do tonight, Marty?" "I don't know. What do you want to do, Angie?" I thought that was like the greatest thing I'd ever heard in my life. I thought it was so great. It sounded like two guys talking to one another, and I didn't think of it that way, but I kept saying for weeks after that, I was walking around going to a friend, "What do you want to do tonight, Marty?" "I don't know. What do you want to do, Angie?" And I thought it was amazing, and then, of course, I forgot about it, and then ultimately Diner. To me, Diner is, in a sense, is from Marty, is now taking that all the way, and that, to me, was the influence. So it's like a little kid, something gets into your head, and it continues to evolve.
It rang true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. You're much more handsome in person than you are in pictures. That's all.
That's like a comment that my mother made when she met John Forsythe, and said, we went to the set in Baltimore when I came in, and she saw John Forsythe and says, "You know, it's amazing, you look heavier in person."
Hi, I'm from Baltimore too. Not only Baltimore, but Forest Park High School was
Wow.
at the Hilltop Diner. That was senior day, and the community. So your films really get to me because I lived a lot of it. I was a little bit younger, but
Of course.
I lived a lot of it. So thank you for being in my new hometown for like 13 years now. But what else do you have in store for us? What's the next project?
Well, starting this summer, we're doing a Diner as a musical, and very much like the movie. So it's a comedy drama, not just some kind of real lighthearted piece. And Sheryl Crow did the music for it. And so we opened in San Francisco in late summer, pre-Broadway, and then we're supposed to go to Broadway in February. So that's in the works, and that's kind of interesting. For me, it's like doing something totally new. You know, I mean, it's something I never would imagine doing, but we'll see how that works out. And I just finished this little film that I shot for $2 million with all these little digital cameras. And it's sort of an ecological thriller about it's based 85% on facts about the Chesapeake Bay and the fact that it's 40% dead today, and all the stuff that's in the water that's so detrimental. So I turned it into, rather as a documentary, I did it as a sort of theatrical, ecological thriller that frightens you at times. And it looks like it's a documentary about what happened on a given day in a fictitious place. So that's supposed to come out sometime in the late fall. And in terms of work, it's a complete departure from anything that I've done. So that was sort of fun to play with as well.
You also did a documentary as part of the ESPN 30 for 30 series. I know all the Baltimore people know about it, I'm sure, but it was called The Band That Wouldn't Die. Yeah. And for those of you who missed it, it certainly belongs in the Baltimore pantheon. And it was about how the band of the Baltimore Colts kept playing even after the Colts moved to Indianapolis. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what's interesting, I mean, I have to hand it to ESPN, because ESPN said, do you have a story that, we're going to do these stories, do you have anything that you, sports story you'd like to tell? And I told them about the band, that wouldn't die, basically, that when the Colts left town, the Baltimore Colts band continued to perform for 12 years without a team. And they had the uniforms. And the reason they had the uniforms is the team left in the middle of the night. They packed the vans in a snowstorm and left town. but they didn't take the uniforms with them, the band uniforms, and because they were at the dry cleaners. And so the dry cleaner called John Seaman, who was head of the Colts marching band, and said, "We have the uniforms, and it's going to be in the van, and this evening, I don't think the van is locked for some reason, and so they went and they got the band uniforms, and then they were afraid that the Irsay family would come and confiscate the band uniforms, and they might be arrested for keeping it. So they took the band uniforms and put them in a mausoleum in a cemetery and hid them there. And then finally, the wife of Irsay said, to Bobby Irsay, let them keep the uniforms. And so then they were able to. And then for 12 years, they would march at picnics, etc., marching as the Baltimore Colts band, and until they got the Raven team. So it's a 12-year piece of these characters trying to keep alive the marching band. And it's a very kind of, in many ways, it's almost like a Capra-esque story done in a documentary, and it's all true. It's the craziest story I've ever heard.
And they were involved in the opening ceremony, sort of bringing the Ravens onto the field.
Yeah,
in some
they
way?
brought the Ravens onto the field, and then they became the Ravens marching band. And then the irony of it, because then they had a new song, they had a Ravens marching band song, and so they showed the documentary at the stadium on a big screen, the Jumbotron, and they had all the people come there, and sitting on the infield. And when the Baltimore Colts marching song, the old one, would be played, the people all went crazy, and now they dropped the Raven marching song and have gone back and replaced it with the Baltimore Colts marching band song. But they were such fanatics, because when one of the big #1 fans died, he was buried in a Colts uniform, and they played the Colts marching song as a funeral dirge. Like in Diner, it was done as a wedding march thing. So, it's real fanatics, and it's a sense of real community is really the key to it, I think.
So do you root for the Colts or the Ravens?
The Ravens, not the Colts. No, you only root for the Colts to lose.
Right.
Right here. Question right here.
I was born and raised in Baltimore as well, and the film for me was like a walk down memory lane. And I was wondering, that quarry scene, was that Milford Mills Swim Club?
Yes. Yes, it was.
And you know what? That sign was really there.
But the sign wasn't in Milford Mill. It was at Meadow something.
Meadowbrook.
Meadowbrook.
But we did
Look,
have a
see,
sign
look
in
at it.
Milford.
They know, right?
I don't know how so many people from Baltimore here when the weather in Baltimore is so nice.
Oh, no, well.
You got the one cloudy day in Orlando.
That's right, Meadowbrook Swim Club, wasn't it?
I want to get someone who hasn't asked a question. You, sir, yeah.
I've been to Baltimore. I'm not from there, but my question is, can you imagine a collaboration among you, John Waters, and Ann Tyler?
It's funny, someone once said, or maybe it was John Waters that said, that we were basically separated by 6 exits on the Beltway, and how different the world was, literally, from there to where I was. It was literally like a totally different place. And that was always the thing about Baltimore, that if you were in one section and you went to another section, you could hear the different accent. And it was very distinctively different between where you grew up in Baltimore back then.
He's been waiting for a while.
I had the privilege of working for a movie theater in the early 90s, and we got this fantasy film that you did, Toys, that I may be in the minority, but it's one of my favorite that you've done, and I'm kind of wondering how you go from Good Morning Vietnam and Avalon and Bugsy to Toys, and what might be the impetus behind that.
Well, Toys was one of the first things that I wrote, and I wrote it with Valerie Curtin, but we did it back in around 1979 originally. I mean, it's ironic that for most people who didn't see it, how much of it's come about, because in it, it was about a toy factory, and a general takes over a toy factory, and he was talking about building small remote control planes that kids could operate, and those remote control planes could ultimately fly and bomb and destroy. And so rather than having big bombers and everything, it can all be done with remote control, and about the idea that how that can work out, which has now all come to pass. And a lot of the toys that the general wanted were these kind of war toys that are now actually coming to be. The thing with that movie, for most of you who didn't see it, was truly like panned because it wasn't like a black comedy. It seemed as if it were a sweet comedy, but it was really very dark underneath it. And I was curious about the kind of the potential of where the things that it explores in terms of children and hand-eye coordination with computer games, that they could be playing computer games, but it's for real. They could be blowing up things, but it's for real. And that a kid at a computer, it looks like a game. A video game is a video game, but those things can be having real consequences. So it was a very surrealistic piece, and as far as I know, I don't know that any surrealistic comedy has ever succeeded in Hollywood. That one certainly didn't.
We've got time for just a couple more.
One more question right
you
here.
got a mic there, and we'll do one more after that.
Hi. I was really intrigued by how non-duplicitous all of the characters were. Trey with Adrian Brody's character, even Ben when he's in the closet. And the daughter, Sylvie. There's a directness, even the drug dealer. There's a directness that everybody has that's not filled with the usual hiding from themselves or hiding from other people. And I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Well, I mean, I think, as I said, that it's the other side of life, that we always assume that everything is that there are dark aspects to it, as opposed to a lot of it has to do with behavior of not understanding one another at all, which is what I wanted to play out and explore. Because, for instance, the James Brown scene, in fact, happened when we were, with some of my friends, we were driving and we went into Washington, D.C. at the Royal Theater, and it said James Brown, and we had just heard about James Brown. And so we pulled up, and there was nobody on the street, and we ran up. We said, "Has the show started?" He said, "No, it's about to go on." And then we raced inside, and we sat down, and then we looked and went, "We're the only white people here. We're the only white people." And then once you got past that and James Brown came on, it was like an experience. It was like an explosion of beyond anything we'd have ever imagined. And you can imagine us trying to imitate James Brown later on to explain to our friends what he was like. You know what I mean? So it's the fact of when we're isolated from one another, we will never know or understand one another. When we begin to kind of integrate in the general terms of it all, how much we are just people. We are just people. And we keep creating these barriers that once we can take them down, then we can just deal with one another and get past that. And so I was looking at it from that viewpoint that I did, as opposed to other movies that have treated it in a different context.
Do one more? Yeah, thank you.
I did have a couple, but my bad. I wanted to ask about the casting for Liberty Heights, just in particular. I mean, well, how much of the decision making did you have in doing that? I'd met Anthony Anderson a couple times, and he had mentioned that that was a big deal for him to do Liberty Heights. And the casting with it. And I'm a big fan of, I grew up watching Carol Burnett, Tim Conway, and I just wanted to ask about your experiences with doing the Tim Conway show, like getting that on the air. But if we don't have time, just one or the other.
Well, two things. One, in terms of casting, I have to ultimately, I'll see people and pick the people I think seem right. Anthony seemed right for that. Adrian Brody, Ben Foster. Ben Foster came in. He was the only kid I saw for that role. I just thought he was so perfect. And so you just make those decisions. and you go from there. That's the only way I know how to work, is just you pick the people you think are going to be able to deliver. And as Carol, as I said, it was just a great kind of experience in many ways. Tim Conway was very inventive physically, so we did a lot of the physical stuff for Tim because we worked with him when he had his own show for a very brief time. So when he did The Old Man, he used to do that little old man, you know. So we wrote a lot of those pieces for him. I remember one where he was in, I think in Australia, he was the he was the orchestra conductor, you know, and it took him seemed like forever to get to the podium, you know. And he got there and he was with the audience, he had the baton and he went like that. And the baton, you know, disappeared and we went, it's gone, you know what I mean? Can't find the baton, you know. And so he knew how to milk those moments and really play them for all they were worth. So that was a great informative period for me.
So I have one final question. Your son is directing now, correct?
Yes.
What do you think of his work?
Well, he's done, you know, he wrote and directed his first film this past year called Another Happy Day, which was about an extended family. And he has, you know, it's darker than the work that I would have done, but it's, you know, it's another generation, another time, which I thought he did a really, really good job. Had a great visual sense and worked very well with, you know, a bunch of actors of Ellen Burstyn and Ellen Barkin and Demi Moore, and it's a very, very good cast that he put together for it. And so now the question is, what's he going to do next? So he's working on a few projects. We'll see what happens.
Well, I speak for myself, and I hope for the entire audience. We can't thank you enough for being here, for sharing your experiences.
Thank you.
Another round of applause, please.
This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.